Good day to all you fellow mates and adventurers. My name is Mordecai, and welcome to the Institute of Supernatural Arcane Affairs. I will be your narrator for today, where we analyse various RPG-related stories for potential considerations that can be applied to tabletop role-playing. With today's horror story narration, we are doing a number of things differently. First, this story is a fan-requested story, having been written by the fan as well. And so here's my sincere thanks to the fan who requested this story, and may we all learn potentially valuable considerations as we examine what went wrong, and what can be done to avoid or handle similar situations in the future. Let's begin. Homebrew is a considerable asset for any given campaign. When implemented well and with due care, it can get players invested into the world as they are exploring it on the table. It also lets everyone know that effort has gone into preparing the game for the table on behalf of the Dungeon Master. Plus, it can be a way to provide some extra or different challenges for the party, and the investment of the party can leave a lasting impression, potentially providing inspiration for current and future players. But just like how good considered homebrew can get a party really invested into a campaign, bad homebrew can result in highly unfavourable situations. In some of the worst cases of bad homebrew, you can be at risk of producing an avatar of red flags, which may as well be a game-ending event. Another danger of focusing on homebrew is the potential risk of failing to run a campaign, and instead be running a series of escalating, disconnected story beats. So how does the story's homebrew hijinks wreck the game at the table? Let's find out as we embark on another delve. Before we begin with today's story, if you like my content or want to support the channel, feel free to subscribe and leave a like on the video. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Plus, you can always change your mind at a later date. For now, please enjoy. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPGHorrorStories. Today's narrative is titled, My Terrible First Campaign, How a Tone-Deaf Furry Killed My Helpless Bard, and is written by Reddit user TacoMan is here 943. This is my first time posting here on the subreddit. You know how first-time storytellers can sometimes make mistakes. I was new to Dungeons & Dragons when this story happened. I had just joined Crit Crab's Discord server. That's where I met the DM of this story. I'll call him Powerman. This name will make sense in a minute. When I joined Powerman's server and the game, I made my first ever bard. I can't remember their name sadly, but they were a changeling College of Glamour bard. I made them with the intention of them being a support character, but that was sadly short-lived. There were a few people that were problematic at the table, such as a guy that talked over everyone whenever there was time to roleplay. It didn't help that the plot was on a timer. An important thing to note about me as well is that I'm the type of person that tends to bottle things up until I either shut down or explode. In the first session of the campaign I played with this group, my bard tragically died. My character was introduced when he was cut out of a monster's guts with a few of the other PCs, which was really fun to roleplay. After introductions were made, we made our way out into the world, eventually finding a nearby cave. There were two homebrewed monsters that looked like weird bears at the opening, guarding the cave's inner secrets within. Powerman had teased this as a plot hook for the entire party. As a group, we started to talk about what it was we wanted to do. We roleplayed for a few minutes towards the end of the session, with the party meeting a new guy who I'll call Blue Man. He played some sort of homebrewed fox race with bright blue fur and had a fox familiar. We found him just shortly after he had somehow found an item he wanted, just outside the cave. He then headed towards the cave, investigating a spot that was fairly close to where the two homebrew monsters were guarding the entrance. I tried to convince the party not to split up, as my bard didn't want Blue Man to enter the cave alone. My bard was attacked by the bear-like things, and they pinned him down fairly quickly. Blue Man's character did not help as my bard called out for help. The rest of the party tried to get Blue Man's character to help my bard as well. However, it was revealed that Blue Man's character could only speak in the Fae's native language, that being Sylvan. But my bard could thankfully speak it, and he yelled out for help in Sylvan, hoping that he would do something to help. The other party members didn't know what to do, so one of them attempted to shoot an arrow near Blue Man to grab his attention. Power Man allowed it, but he didn't say something along the lines of, "Okay, you hit the side of the wall and get Blue Man's attention." No, roll to hit Blue Man and hope you miss. Unfortunately, the arrow struck Blue Man, which then resulted in him turning around and stabbing my bard as they yelled out, "But I didn't shoot you with the arrow!" To Blue Man, however, it was a simple, "Nope, stab for you." Then, before I knew it, Power Man said this, "Do you have any one-liners you want to say to the monsters?" I said "screw you," or something along the lines of that. I was salty. I thought it was my own fault. But upon reflection, I think I should be mad at both Blue Man and Power Man. The other players tried to revive my bard, but somehow my bard was now missing his brain. Yeah, that's right, one of the monsters ate my bard's brain. It also took a while for the party to figure out that the homebrew bears somehow ate the bard's brain in less time than it takes to breathe. After the party killed the monsters and failed the attempt to revive him, they decided to give my bard a cremation and burned my bard's body. Looking back, I hate myself for not fighting back on how full of nonsense Blue Man stabbing my bard was. At the time, I wished they would have retconned or rewound the game so I could play with that character. But instead we went on with the game. I will admit I was playing rather stupid. I didn't ask enough questions. I had Speak with Animals still up for some reason, and I really should have asked Power Man more to keep my bard alive. Before the next session, however, Power Man helped me make a new character. I still have his character sheet, having saved it under the name My Monk of Doom, in case I get to reuse the character in a future campaign under a different name. He was a fire genasi who was adopted by a dwarf, and in the campaign was called Rickver, or Rick for short, Metal Mane. He had a 20 in dexterity at level 5, and Power Man allowed me to take feats that increased his dexterity and other stats, like the feat Great Weapon Master. This is where Power Man gets his nickname from. He was something of a super min-maxer. He used a point-buy system with a much higher point limit than normal. I think it was around the 40s, but I don't really remember. He gave me ideas on how to make monks, which I still use to this day. My colloquial Monk of Doom has the most detailed backstory I've ever made for a character even to this day. I even made family members for them. I might have the character sheet somewhere, but I don't know. Despite my best efforts with this character, I found it rather hard to understand the campaign's story. It was just all over the place. There were so many plot hooks we ran across during the main plot, which itself was on a time limit. However, the summation of the story was to get an item and to take it to a special place. The timeline was a month in the game, I think. Personally, I wanted to really explore this world, as I felt that the background of this world was pretty cool. Sadly, however, there was little to no time for each of the plot hooks presented. Just save those for later, even though some of those plot hooks were linked together. And to make matters worse, we kept getting our magic items stolen or taken away from us. But Fat Tail, which led to me ultimately leaving the campaign, I will save for part 2. Thanks for reading. And that's where the first part of the story ends. So, let's address the furry in the room. I knew at some point in narrating RPG horror stories that it was a matter of when and not if I covered a story involving a problem player who was also possibly a furry. I mean, Blue Man is effectively portraying himself as one, by playing a character that's a homebrewed blue-furred race, which also doesn't speak common for some reason. That's enough for most people to jump to the conclusion that Blue Man is a furry. Then again, perhaps not. But for the purposes of this analysis, let's assume, postulate, speculate, conclude that Blue Man was a furry. For those of you who are thinking, well, not all furries are problem players like Blue Man was in this story, you are correct. There are some furries who are much worse. And there are some who are not problem players at all. But this isn't necessarily the video in which we discuss that. Instead, let's talk about the fact that Blue Man was role-playing a functionally tone-deaf character, and how the homebrew involved provided a terrible situation that got a character killed. First, there is a good reason why even Aarakocra, a race that has been published in official Dungeons & Dragons material and is based on birds, has Common as one of their known languages that they can speak, write, and read. In fact, every race is capable of this. So to have a homebrew player character race that can't goes against even the base material presented in the player's handbook. Even so, we then have the scene presented before Blue Man. We have a character grappled by monstrous creatures, with said character screaming in desperation for help. You have a nearby party who is also screaming for help. This is a situation which communicates, here's your chance to show the party that your character is a cool dude. It is a setup to establish a new character as a valuable member of the party. So to see a player have their character ignore the spotlight opportunity is rather bizarre. Oh, and we can't forget how Power Man turned around and converted an attempt to grab Blue Man's attention into an attack against Blue Man, which resulted in him stabbing the bard he was set up to rescue. Before we can delve into solutions on how to avoid or mitigate similar situations at the table, we have a part 2 to cover, so let's hop to it. Part 2 of the story written by user Taco Man is titled My Terrible First Campaign, The City of No Magic, and features how the campaign crumbles. This is the continuation of the story I had written about previously. In brief, Part 1 had the campaign being run by Power Man, saw the party get introduced to Blue Man, who then proceeded to ignore the obvious damsel in distress, that being my bard, before turning around and stabbing him to death when the party tried to draw his attention to the damsel in distress. My replacement character was Rick the Metalmane, a fire genasi who was adopted by a dwarf, a plot point which sadly never came to fruition. Thankfully, however, Blue Man had decided to leave the game shortly after my newest character had entered. Soon after this happened, we got a few new party members in the next session over. In the session Rick joined the party, he saw that the party were fighting against a giant snake with 2 heads and some yuan-ti. After a short but brutal fight, we licked our wounds and found an old nightclub outside the city where we decided to stay the night. Little did we know, instead of rest we would only find cringe. We walked into the nightclub. As an intense thunderstorm started outside, it turns out that we walked into a random boss fight with no real warning or build-up. The boss was a guy who had a flamethrower located on... yeah, okay. And yes, this was a reference to the video game Dead Rising 2. The newest player characters were a bard who was chained to a wall within the club, a fallen Azamar rogue, as well as a druid turtle. As far as the boss was concerned, it was the quickest boss fight I have ever seen, lasting only 4 or 5 rounds. After the fight, nobody wanted to touch the flamethrower, well, aside from the rogue who decided to take it for some reason. I freed the newest bard and the druid who used his powers to make skeletons. He was a Path the Spores druid as it turns out. The old characters that saw my bard's death did their own things until the storm blew over. When the storm was over, however, the cops came decked out with SWAT gear. The druid was thankfully a noble or something similar, so he was able to get us off the hook the first time that this happened. After we left the nightclub, we entered the No Magic City. Yes, that was what Power Man called it. With most of our party being casters, this is also where I started to check out mentally. Worse yet, the other players started to fight with each other and the DM. We went to a shop that looked like one of those "we're going out of business" stores. We sold a few things and were able to buy a few things from the store. It was at this point that we got jumped by thugs trying to take our stuff from us. We fought them, and one of the players decided to use magic to kill one of the thugs, in the No Magic City, which immediately meant that the cops were on our trail. The rogue and the same guy who used magic to kill the thug decided that they wanted to kill the owner of the "we're going out of the business" shop. They each had law reasons, but I found myself not caring at all. I felt like I wanted to say something, but I was still terrified of losing another character. The rogue and the presumed wizard went on to try and kill the owner regardless, and I guess I really checked out when that started to happen. It was around this time we got the item to take to the place where we're going as part of the plot. My monk also somehow got a pet owl I named Hooty, which I assume was Power Man's way of trying to keep me engaged. When the cops eventually found the party, we were forced to give them our magic items so our characters wouldn't go to jail. I think it was very strongly implied as well that we would have to make new characters if we went to jail. And to reiterate, I really didn't want that to happen again. And so we said bye-bye to our magic items. As I stayed quiet, the other players started to speak up. I continued to bottle stuff up and shut down, as I found myself absolutely hating the game. However, that same evening I started up another game with closer friends. It was on the same day, but after Power Man's game had taken place. At that point, I started to ghost Power Man's game. I know, in hindsight, it was a jerk move, but the whole game was the biggest, hottest mess I had ever seen. I didn't like how new players were still getting pumped into the campaign just to keep it alive. I wanted to say, just kill the game at that point. I genuinely hated those kinds of thoughts, but nobody was really having fun anymore. I didn't tell Power Man my gripes or worries, however. Since Power Man was the dungeon master, he might just kill off my monk, but I found myself not caring at that point. In the other game, I was in a way better situation, and I loved playing my bear totem barbarian kobold I called Joe. And no, this isn't a JoJo's reference. I loved playing that maniac. This is around the time when I also started to compare the two campaigns. I had more fun in the one game with Joe than in the entire campaign as my Monk of Doom. And so, I left Power Man's game. It was too much for me. I picked the game where I had the most fun, but I had to stop playing in that campaign too due to school projects kicking up. Thankfully, I had no horror stories from that campaign. Just my kobold making a minotaur skull into a hat, and getting a mind witness trapped in his small brain. It was good times all around. Overall, I felt as though I made the right choice. Power Man and Blue Man utterly destroyed any enjoyment I could have had for that campaign. However, I was not the only one who suffered. Many like me also began to check out around the time I was leaving, and as time wore on, players left, which is why Power Man kept adding more people into the campaign. I felt as though he should have just killed the entire campaign a long time ago, and I am thankful that I was able to escape Power Man. Recently, I did get in touch again with Power Man, but I decided a while ago that I won't play in his games anymore, as I do suspect it would be more of the same. While it is true he lit my love of homebrewing, magic items and monsters, I feel like he was a poor fit for me as a player. And may my future players have mercy on my soul. So yeah. Thank you for reading my RPG horror story, and may your games be blessed with fortune and fun times. And that's where the story ends. To resume my thoughts from the first part of the story, if we are inclined to do so, we can give the tone deaf furry some credit for helping expose just how bad the campaign was from the beginning. By killing the character who was mere moments ago screaming for help in their native language, and that being the only language they spoke, they waved a red flag warning about some of the issues the campaign would suffer from. And not just in the form of player versus player action being forced without consent or prior discussion with the party as a whole. This does imply that the Dungeon Master also didn't communicate clearly with any of the party members out of character unless they were building a new character or organising potential backstory hooks into the world. You know, before turning around and not talking to the players about potential issues and considering solutions to the issues that present themselves in the campaign. Such as what Power Man titled The City of No Magic. And we can't forget the incident where the party got punished for having magic items, being forced into giving them up to progress the story without being forced to get new characters, which screams elements of bad design. Okay, sure, we had a player use magic to kill a guy in self-defense, presumably in a back alleyway, in a shady part of town, and out of sight of the general public and law enforcement in general. You know, because that's where people tend to get ambushed by thugs. So having the entire police force immediately alerted to the use of magic and responding with what we can safely assume is overwhelming force under such conditions is a red flag for the game. This did also happen after the entire party and the Dungeon Master had gotten into several arguments, some of which were about the game and how it was being ran, from what I can tell. Classic RPG horror story stuff, having massive out-of-character conflicts that affect everyone at the table in some capacity. This leads into a short consideration on the effect of homebrew on campaigns. Some homebrew, carefully and with due consideration, can add a lot of inspiration and fun to the game. It can also be a good way to let the players in on some of the mysteries present within the world, which can start interesting discussions in character on these creatures and items. However, it has to work in conjunction with other elements in order to make a good campaign. Otherwise, your campaign does risk devolving into a series of disconnected events, which Power Man's game devolved into around the time when the Furry left the game, resulting in several players leaving and forcing Power Man to draw in new players, to replace them in some misguided attempt to keep his game going over the course of several sessions in a row. Instead of trying to find out why people were continually leaving, shutting down mid-game, and having some players become completely uninvested. This brings us to the importance of communication, especially between the members of the party and the Dungeon Master. Being able to communicate with the Dungeon Master and fellow party members can feel like a bit of an intimidating prospect. It can invoke feelings of anxiety and can also seem like a daunting task. It can also be made a lot harder when it feels like attempting to talk to the Dungeon Master or problem player is a hopeless cause. Especially when the Dungeon Master is allowing or creating new problems like clockwork with little consideration for the game itself. This is a situation where attempting to communicate with the Dungeon Master can help them understand the problems and potentially get them resolved. But sadly, there are some situations in which the situation cannot or will not be resolved, which leaves players who want to have fun games with limited options, such as finding an alternative game like the poster did towards the end of the second part of the story. For me, the important considerations of the story include the need for constant, clear communication about issues within the game, and that prioritizing a fun game for all of the participants is important. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed my content and would like to see more, feel free to subscribe and give the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Plus, you can always change your mind at a later date. And with that, I shall see you all next time.